From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Hello, welcome to another edition of the McLaughlin Group. Our guests this week are Eleanor, Clift, Clarence Page, and Pat Buchanan. And our special guest is Tiana Lowe of the Washington Examiner. Welcome, Tiana. I'm Tom Rogan, your host. First up, issue 1, Madam Vice President.
First of all, is the answer yes?
The answer is absolutely yes, Joe, and I am ready to work. I am ready to do this with you, for you. I'm just deeply honored, and I'm very excited.
Joe Biden this week selected Kamala Harris as his vice presidential running mate. A 55-year-old African-American, Harris is a former 6-year Attorney General of California and has served as a U.S. Senator from the Golden State since 2017. Harris made her name as a San Francisco district attorney. But while she is popular with the Democratic establishment, she is judged more skeptically by the party's rising left wing. Critics say her record on policing and criminal justice matters makes her ill-suited for the Naval Observatory. Pat, your thoughts on the pick of Kamala Harris as Joe Biden's running mate?
I think Joe cleared a major hurdle and did it fairly well, quite frankly. He picked a black woman and satisfied the people who were demanding that. She passes the qualification test. It helps unite the party to a great degree, not the left of the party. And I think Biden delivered his address in front of the camera better than I've seen him recently. So in that sense, it's all to the good. The problem with the pick here is that Kamala Harris is not a good candidate. She does not wear well. She opened up in 2017 with an audience of about 20,000 crowded to hear her. By the end of the year in December, she was down to about 1% in the polls in Iowa, quit the race, and really was creamed in a debate by Tulsi Gabbard. So I think the best days of Biden's pick, and it was successful, clearing that hurdle, the best days were this week, and next week things will be a little different.
Eleanor, your thoughts?
I think she's a good pick. She speaks to America of the future and, frankly, America of today, a diversifying country and a party that is majority minority. She's of Jamaican and Indian descent. She's a woman of color. I think she's going to sufficiently energize the Democratic base. And if you look specifically at Black women who really are excited about her, they delivered the vote to Barack Obama. He got they had 65% turnout in 2008, 66% in 2012. When Hillary lost, she got 59% of that community. So I think this is clearly, it's a good political pick. I also think she's going to wear just fine. Maybe not with Trumpers who are really searching for a way to define her. She's hard to pigeonhole ideologically. She's not an establishment figure, and she's not a member of the Bernie wing of the party.
Tiana, do you think there are any risks with this particular candidacy, in specific terms of Kamala Harris, perhaps with her record on criminal justice? Or do you think, as Eleanor suggests, that she does bring this sort of best of all worlds Democratic Party element to the base of the ticket?
Well, the truth about Kamala Harris is that ideologically, she's quite hard to pin down. We saw her waffle on the whole Medicare for All issue during the campaign. And even though she likes to sometimes paint herself as a moderate, by the voting record in 2019, she was the furthest to the left senator, including Bernie Sanders. She voted to the left of Bernie Sanders. But with regards to her prosecutorial record, you know, when she was a district attorney of San Francisco, this is someone who championed an anti-truancy policy that when then was spread statewide resulted in mothers going to jail because their kids cut class one too many times. She's not really a moderate. Her detractors will call her a tin pot authoritarian, but the truth is it could be a little bit of a buffer in the era of Democrats countrywide saying defund the police. The fact that she is a little bit more tough on crime, it could definitely cost her a little bit though with the Bernie base. And also, I think that her streak of authoritarianism is not about over policing actual crime and existing law and order, but rather, as we've seen, she has been vicious with sort of creating these judicial litmus tests She and Joe Biden have both talked about banning semi-automatic weapons. I mean, that will do a lot to depress sort of the moderate vote. I don't think that the Bernie bros are going to swing this election, because this election will not be decided in California and New York. However, it will be decided by suburban women in swing states, and they may not love that about Kamala.
Clarence, your thoughts?
Well, Tiana raises some good points, but I agree with Eleanor. The fact is that Kamala Harris is a candidate who has a strong following in the base of the party. First of all, Black women made the difference in a number of races in the past. I think of Doug Jones in Alabama. I think of Joe Biden's campaign in South Carolina, when South Carolina saved Joe after he had lost 3 primaries in a row there. South Carolina and Black voters got him back in the race and right at the front of the line, and he hasn't faltered since. Kamala Harris is a lot like him because she's not an ideologue. That's why she's hard for Republicans to pin down. Now, a lot of people find that refreshing these days after 4 years of Trump ideology, whatever that is. Even Republicans aren't quite sure about him. And I think Kamala also, Tiana raises a good point about that law and order issue out there in California and San Francisco, where she was the district attorney. Indeed, one mother of a child that had sickle cell, and the child had a lot of truancies because of illness. She was prosecuted, and I think fought that case for about a year. Not a good look for Kamala Harris. She has apologized now for any kind of misunderstanding or whatever. But it'd be awfully hard for Republicans, the law and order party, to come and say Kamala is too hard on crime.
One of the things so just to say, so issue 2 is going to be about this crime issue. So we'll save that for issue 2. But Eleanor, can continue.
Oh, I was just going to say that I don't see the Bernie wing of the party is not going to act against her. And in fact, Cori Bush, the activist who just won in Missouri, everybody was trying to kind of goad her into saying that Kamala Harris would not be sufficient, but they're not taking the bait. The fact that the party is unified is huge, and nobody's questioning her credentials to be president. That's what's the most important. And her background as a prosecutor, frankly, she always acts like she's in the courtroom. And that's what she did in her opening announcement. She was prosecuting the case against Trump and Pence. It was very effective. I didn't like it the way she went after Biden, frankly, and took me a while to get over that. He got over it. And the fact that he said to her, he wants her to be the last person in the room when he makes a decision, which is what he wanted from Obama, so that he would be able to be a truth teller. She's going to be telling the truth. And if Biden isn't sufficiently woke enough, she's in touch with today's America. And I think they're a good match. It's a good ticket. It's a strong ticket.
Tom, the strength, I think the real strength in the Democratic Party with the Black community is not Kamala Harris. She didn't even make it to the Iowa caucuses. The real strength is Joe Biden. I mean, Clyburn came out for him in South Carolina. It was more than 60% of the vote was African American. They gave Biden the biggest victory he had. They rescued him from 3 straight humiliating defeats. And then all through the South, the African American vote came out for Joe Biden. So I think it's more his. He is one of the few white people left in the Democratic Party who has that kind of deep roots in the African American community. As for Kamala Harris, look, I think that the Republicans, I hope what they do is they go to work on her separately. I'm sure she has not been really vetted fully by the opposition. I think they're going to do that. My hope would be that in the national campaign, they would focus still on the candidate. This is Trump versus Biden, and they ought to stay focused on Biden and not get distracted by this side war.
Well, that's the beauty of it. Biden doesn't need her to pull him across the finish line the way Walter Mondale looked at Jerry Ferraro in 1984. That was a Hail Mary pass. This is a pick that's not going to do any harm, and it will energize Democrats. You're wrong about that if you think she doesn't have any traction. Look at the response today from the various groups. 73% approval among Democrats. This is a winner. Now, she's going to take a beating. The next 2 months are going to be ugly. But I maintain that this is a strong ticket, and she could prosecute the case against Trump and Pence in a more aggressive way than Joe Biden. That's what vice presidents do. I mean, she's a very polished attack dog.
Is the Democratic appetite when all of this is over just to maintain this Trump obsession and prosecute Trump and Pence? Or is it that they really just do want a Biden-style return to normalcy? In a way, choosing Kamala in the ways that she is a moderate, crucially, and this is not really an over-examined aspect of it, is with regards to foreign policy. She is someone who has publicly avowed support to Israel. She is someone who follows the Democratic establishment line when it comes to dictators like Maduro and condemning China. I mean, think about it. We were only a few votes away from a Bernie Sanders and the Squad administration. And so I think that Biden does have a far ahead enough lead that clearly the only principle he needed to abide by was do no harm. And given the fact that first he boxed himself into picking a woman and then picking a black woman, unfortunately, there are no black governors in the country. She is the only black woman in the Senate. She was by far the most qualified black woman for the job, and quite frankly, had the least political liabilities. That much is true. The question is, will she be a do no harm candidate? And that remains to be seen. I think that she had a softer reboot in her speech, and that hopefully is signaling the tone that she will use. But if we saw the same Kamala that completely flamed out in the primaries, she could wind up doing some harm to Biden's nomination.
Clarence, do you think part of the reason that Joe Biden selected Kamala Harris over Susan Rice was this idea that perhaps Kamala Harris has less of a kind of formed foreign policy worldview, whereas Susan Rice foreign policy was her beat, and obviously she would be associated by Republicans with Benghazi. I mean, how much do you think that foreign policy element played in, aside from the domestic stuff?
Yes, Tom, there's a difference between Kamala Harris and Susan Rice.
Yes,
and we're all going to be seeing that over and over again. I think Kamala has had an edge over Susan. I like Susan Rice. Republicans hate her. She's just another Hillary as far as they're concerned. I think that was a big reason why she didn't get Joe's nod. Joe is looking for somebody who is a lot like himself. And by picking Kamala Harris, he did what Barack Obama did with him. There's a difference there too, excuse me. But of course, you remember Biden, one of his famous gaffes about Obama being articulate. It was an odd description to have a gaffe over. But anyway, Obama boosted his own public recognition as far as his image was concerned by picking Biden and vice versa. And now we see the value of that as the Democrats' biggest selling point now is the return to normalcy. Biden hates to say that, but that's absolutely the campaign that's shaping up. And President Trump doesn't really know what to do about it. His old epithets don't work against these two, and he hasn't come up with anything original yet.
Well, let me say, if he had passed over Kamala Harris and given it to Susan Rice, I think you'd have a real problem in the Democratic Party, because he said he's going to appoint a woman, and then he indicated a black woman. There are no black woman governors. There's only one black woman senator. And if you pass her over, when she has good tickets, good credentials for a vice presidential candidate, then you got a lot of explaining to do. The second thing is, I've talked about her persona in the debates where she was a little tough and mean. My understanding of Susan Rice is that she wins that hands down in that category. So I think, and also she's foreign policy, she's not political. I think that Kamala Harris touches a lot of bases that Susan Rice did not.
Eleanor?
Right. And Joe Biden doesn't need help with foreign policy. He wanted a governing partner, and Susan Rice is not a congenial deal maker to be working the Hill. So, and Kamala Harris, having been in the Senate, does do that. Before anybody cast a single vote in the Democratic primaries, Democrats were saying the dream ticket is Biden-Harris. And her punching at him in that debate, I think, really turned off a lot of Democrats. And she didn't run a good campaign, right? Being vice president is very different from running for president. And Biden said from the start he wanted someone tested on the presidential level. So that left him really, I think Elizabeth Warren was in the running, but given the events of this year, 2 white people on the ticket. It's not who the country is anymore. It's not who the Democratic Party is. So again, it's a good pick, and calling her nasty and mean is going to get a lot of women pretty ticked off. A lot of women are going to have her back because they recognize these adjectives. Strident is another one I'll be watching out for.
How about ambitious?
Okay. Ambitious is another good one.
Can you imagine that?
Too ambitious.
In all fairness,
in Washington.
In all fairness, Trump uses about 5 adjectives, nasty being one of them. And it's not particularly gendered. Think about all the things that he said about Mitt Romney, or think about all the things he said about Jeff Sessions, the first person in the Senate to endorse him. That's his personality.
Tiana, nasty has been reserved for women. There are T-shirts after he called Hillary nasty woman.
Okay, so let's, as we close up this issue, Tiana, looking at the president's side of the equation, moving towards November, I would suggest we've seen perhaps a slightly kinder and gentler Trump, just slightly, in the last couple of weeks.
Where? Where is he?
Do you think that there is, any evolving strategy on the part of Team Trump to try and, really go for some of these moderates who, to Eleanor's point, probably have been put up with some of the rhetoric the president has come out with? Or am I, as perhaps Eleanor and Clarence would suggest, deluding myself in the idea that the president
So there are 2 sides to this equation, right? There's the policy side. I think we're seeing great stuff from Pompeo, really focusing on China. We already know that's an issue that galvanizes voters on both sides. We've seen extraordinary movement just from 2017 in terms of Republicans and Democrats now coming to a consensus that China is an enemy. We're seeing concern about TikTok. We're seeing concern about Uyghurs. And then even internally, brokering this deal this peace deal between the United Arab Emirates and Israel. These are extraordinary, unprecedented wins. But then you have the actual Trump campaign. And unfortunately, the tail wags the dog. If you see the people who get booted out and the people who get brought in, everyone who gets brought in is as Trumpy as possible. We had today Trump's legal campaign advisor retweeting out and saying the idea of Kamala, whether or not she's legally eligible to be vice president because she was born on American soil to 2 non-citizen parents, whether or not she's even eligible to be VP. It is not an open question. It is a closed question. And it makes the Trump campaign seem like they're going to touch that racial angle. I do not understand why you would reboot the most racist controversy of Trump's political past. It just makes no sense. Hammer her on her record. Hammer her on being a leftist. Hammer her on Law and Order and all of that. Do not immediately go for the race angle 48 hours after Biden announced.
Okay, Clarence, you get the concluding word on this issue.
Well, I think, boy, there's so much to say about this. Tiana's right. I mean, I miss the sensible conservatives like Pat Buchanan. Remember him? And a lot of other sensible conservatives in the past who really led us down, really towards some interesting ideas. We could have real debates. Now, name calling on day one, it's and bad name calling. I don't want to make fun of a man with a limited vocabulary like our president, but he has a very limited vocabulary.
We will move on to issue 2, crime and suburbia.
I will always be a police officer. It's who I am. But ultimately, as I learned from a former boss, when you know it's time to go, you know it's time to go.
Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best resigned this week, protesting what she said was, quote, the overarching lack of respect for the officers, the men and women who work so hard day in and day out, unquote. Best's resignation follows the Seattle Council decision to cut the police department budget by $4 million, or roughly 1%, a demand of liberal activists. The cuts follow weeks of Black Lives Matter protests. But amid spiking violent crime rates in major US cities, Best's resignation adds another twist to the political debate over the future of policing in America. Evincing as much, President Trump on Wednesday suggested that Democratic policies on policing would encourage suburban women to vote for him. Polls suggest a majority of suburban female voters currently support Joe Biden. Eleanor, your thoughts on the Trump campaign's belief that perhaps crime and security will play into the president heading to November?
Well, the president just didn't say suburban women would vote for him. He said suburban housewives would vote for him. There aren't that many women in suburbia these days who call themselves housewives. That's really retrograde. And then he added to that, that these suburban women like his policies, because if you elect Biden, you're going to get Cory Booker heading up policy. I don't think they're doing anything to conceal the racist appeal that they're trying to make here. Now, about the police chief, I have huge sympathy for this woman. She was doing a great job. The community loved her. She felt that she could not take the funding cut that was proposed. The Black Lives Matter activists in that area also objected to the funding cut. They called it a performative act because it doesn't improve policing. If they'd said, we're cutting the policing, but we're improving social services by this amount of money, we're going to set up, adolescent counseling centers or whatever. So nobody likes this, and it's a complete bastardization, frankly, of the whole defunding police movement.
Pat, there is this challenge, I think, that certainly Democratic mayors are facing in cities that they run, where violent crime, places like New York and Chicago, is significantly up, even from high levels in the case of Chicago before, this summer of mayhem, if you will. How do you see it playing out politically?
Well, first, I think defund the police is sort of self-explanatory to me. Maybe there's some subtle meaning in there. But let me say this, Tom, there are two forms of violence and crime that have suddenly sort of coalescing together. The first is like what happened in Washington, D.C., where at a block party, 20 people are shot to death by 4 shooters coming in. It's things like these massacres that occur, like Chicago with the dead, like New York have got more dead up there this by August 5th than they had all of last year. That's one. And all of this going on at 2.5 months after George Floyd died. What is happening now is you're getting a rising public reaction. There was a story this morning in the Post, Richmond and the Black community around the Robert E. Lee statue. They said, cut it out. Stop every night for breaking windows, destroying things, looting. You're destroying the community we live in. And people are getting fed up and sick of this. Now, 2.5 more months of that, I think law and order and crime are going to be the kind of issue they were in 1968.
First of all, crime is up in Republican cities too. I will point that out. I'm happy to go over after the show, give you the statistics. Crime is up everywhere this summer, largely because of the pandemic, but also because of some internal problems. Chicago's problems, which I've written quite a bit about, are indeed manifest, and a lot of it is really internal. There is a push to get more law enforcement, but also a push to get more social services. What do our kids do when they get home from school? What do these folks do when they get out of prison, where they've been held? Perhaps it's because they couldn't make bail.
People who live in cities have already made the concession that they will pay more taxes, and they don't mind that. However, we expect for our children to get good public education, in person preferably. We expect law enforcement to protect public safety and private property, and we expect social services to go to getting the homeless the help they need. That process has completely broken down in American cities, and as a result, you're going to get a lot of white flight. It's inevitable. I'm hearing about it in Los Angeles. I'm hearing about it on the Upper West Side. And quite frankly, what these communities, what these urban communities need, especially these communities of color, and what a lot of them are begging for, is more law enforcement, not less.
Okay, very good. All right, predictions, Pat.
I think that Biden-Harris will get a bump in the polls, which will take them to basically the highest level I think they will have in this campaign. But from then on out, I think it's going to be a real battle to tear down the ticket. And I think the key events, again, are going to be those 3 debates, if Joe comes out of his basement for those.
Eleanor.
The QAnon supporter who just won the Republican primary in Georgia will present the Republican Party with some real decisions. Are they going to continue to protect her, even though they shunned Steve King, who eventually lost his primary bid after he had made all kinds of anti-Semitic and anti-racial remarks? And in 2016, the Republican Senatorial Committee did not support David Duke when he was running for president. What is this Republican Party? They're going to have to really, what messages are they going to send? Are they for QAnon, like the president is?
Okay, Tiana.
I think we get at least 7% economic growth from the second to the third quarters of this year. If you see in the BEA's report from last quarter's GDP, Americans are flush with cash. The political pressure is on for Congress to authorize more funding. And clearly, this is a consumer-guided economy right now. If you saw the difference between demand for goods versus services, people still spent money on goods. They only didn't spend money on services because everything were closed. I think people want to go out. I think the economy is going to get a huge boon, and I think this is going to look a lot more V-shaped than we think. We've already recovered 40% of the jobs lost, so I think there's more good to come.
Good maths assessment there from the math graduate, Tiana. Clarence, your prediction?
Yes, President Trump this week, with his wonderful candor, blamed Democrats for the fact that he's blocking funds to the Postal Service because he says it's only going to increase Democratic turnout. I think he's right, and I think he is going to be wrong in the end, or he's going to lose in the end as a result of it.
Okay, I predict that President Macron's deployment of La Royale, the French Navy, to the Eastern Mediterranean to try and intimidate President Erdogan won't succeed. Erdogan is invested now, and Chancellor Merkel is going to have to offer him some juicy money to get out of the situation he faces with Greece. Thank you for watching.